I bet you've never finished your time anywhere with a lesson on Shimei. And it's a pretty challenging class, this one, I would say. I'm going to preface it by something I know you know, that David is a man after God's own heart. And that's God saying that. It's not some revered theologian. God says he was a man after my own heart. And I think this is a powerful lesson in understanding God's heart. It has to do with judgment. It has to do with judging and false judging. It has to do with who we listen to as well, I believe. I'm going to just read through some of these passages because I know they're probably not overly familiar to you. So I'm going to start in 2 Samuel 16, and I'm going to read actually from the beginning because both Shimei and Ziba have something to do with the house of Saul. Okay, the house of Saul has been more than decimated at this point. There's not a whole lot of them left. Most of them died in battle or were put to death. And so one of those that is still surviving is a chap called Mephibosheth. Do you remember him? Do you know anything about Mephibosheth?
It's the one that he found and said, is there anybody in Jonathan's house I can show mercy to?
Yeah, which is kind of an interesting thing because that sounds like God, doesn't it? I want to show mercy to him. And Mephibosheth comes forward limping because he's lame in one foot. He was dropped awkwardly when he was a baby by his nurse. And he's crippled, basically. And he comes before David thinking, I'm one of the last, and he's sought me out so he can kill me as well, which is normal back then. You don't want anyone of a family that could be troublesome to you to survive. And this is some time later, but Mephibosheth goes down before David back in 2 Samuel 9, and he says, "What do you want? What business do you want with a dog like me?" And that term "dog" it doesn't sit well with us today because dogs are treated very differently in most places than they were back then. But dogs were flea-bitten, feral, and nasty. Yeah, disease carrying there. So if someone called you a dog, it was a real insult. Okay, well, to reference yourself as a dog is kind of saying, what do you want to do with me? The lowest piece of dirt around, kind of thing. So that was Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth ended up being taken into King David's family. He sat and had a place permanently at the king's table, and it was that way for many, many years, decades. And then this happens when Absalom is out to overthrow his father, and he's on the verge of entering Jerusalem. David flees with his entourage, and he only leaves a few people behind. The two priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and Hushai, who was one of his counselors. He says, "You need to go back in there so you can kind of find out what Absalom, is doing, and you report to the two priests, and they'll get word to me." Okay, so that's about all of David's entourage that stayed behind. And verse 1 of chapter 16 there in 2 Samuel, when David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, okay, so he's not of the house of Saul, but he's always served. He's like the head servant, if you will. He met him, David, with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, "Why have you bought these?" And Ziba answered, "The donkeys for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink." And the king said, "And where is your master's son?" And Ziba said to the king, "Behold, Mephibosheth remains in Jerusalem." For he said, today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father. And then the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. And Ziba said, I pay homage. Let me ever find in your favor in your sight, my lord the king. Ziba had always been the kind of the agent, if you will. He'd overseen all of Mephibosheth's lands and property, and he used to, skim off the top and give to his own children. He got plenty of them. I think we find out later, like 15 sons or something. So he'd done very well out of the house of Saul. But you notice something he was doing there? What did he tell David? Was that the truth? Was Mephibosheth thinking, yes, finally, David's been thrown out? A man who's sat at his table all this time. And yes, the house of Saul is going to get that, get redemption, not redemption. They're going to get, judgment, retribution. That's the word I'm looking for. Ziba's lying, isn't he?
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, because who's taking the throne?
Absalom is about to storm Jerusalem with his army.
Right.
He's going to restore Saul's line to the throne.
That sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? I think Absalom's going to take the crown for himself, isn't it?
Well, sure he is. I mean, it's obvious.
Right. And he's not of the house of Saul. He's of David's own lineage. So, yeah, something doesn't ring true there. And I'm sure David's aware of that, but he's got greater things that he's concerned about right now than trying to deal with Ziba. Anyway, that just gives you some context. And then, straight after that, we're reported about something else. And this is more the subject of the lesson. When King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men who were on his right hand and on his left. Now, does something strike you as odd about that behavior? This guy is either willfully reckless, because you throw stones at David's mighty men at your at your own risk, really. These guys will take you down in an instant, all right? But he obviously feels like he's got place and the right to do this. Okay, so he's coming across. I don't know whether belligerent's the right word, but it's almost as if he has some God-given right to do this.
I wonder if he was crazy.
Yeah.
Seriously, because in ancient times, what does David say? Well, if the Lord's told him to do this, well, this is not the act of a rational man.
Doesn't seem that, but
so, sometimes people that were just completely out of it were considered touched by God. And so when David says, well, if God's telling him to curse, let him curse, it would make a little more sense if you think, okay, he's just nuts.
Like dogs barking at the full moon.
Well, that matches in with what's going to be said about him in the next couple of verses, as he's called it, labeled a dead dog.
Yeah.
Why should this dead dog?
Right. I mean, that's even worse than being called a dog, isn't it?
Yeah. It's just this worthless person. And so maybe worthless because he's a little insane, worthless because
how much power has the house of Saul really got anymore? I mean, if Shimei is about the only one left, plus Mephibosheth, who's a cripple, they're not exactly a power broker, are they? Anyway. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. Or something similar to that in your translation. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. Now, I just want to draw your attention to what he just said there. Is that factually correct? Was it David that was directly responsible for the blood of the house of Saul? Did he kill Saul? Did he kill Jonathan? Did he kill anybody? Did he kill anyone directly himself? Or did he give orders to his own men to have anyone killed from the house of Saul? Don't think so, did he? Now, Joab did some things, his commander. He killed, was it Abner, the son of Ner, who was the commander of Saul's forces? And Joab's that's going to come back on Joab about the time that David passes away. Because he's going to leave directions to deal with Joab. Because he's got blood on his hands. He killed not just him, he's going to kill, is it Amasa? Who was going to be made, David's going to make the head of his army right around this time here.
Shook hands with him and stabbed him.
Mm.
Is that the one where
I
he
believe
grasped
so.
his hand and then, since his hand was occupied, killed him?
Something like that, yeah. But he's got blood on his own head, blood guilt, but David didn't kill the house of Saul. He didn't murder anybody. So that's a factually incorrect statement. And yet, it seems that Shimei believes whatever has been said about it. He's decided to believe something that's not true. Okay? And if you believe something that's not true, then the foundation of your actions just became problematic, didn't it? Because it's based on a lie. Okay, so if anything, David protected King Saul, didn't he? Because there were a couple of occasions when some of his, like Joab, wanted to kill him and had opportunity to kill King Saul, but he didn't, because how did David describe the king?
Killed the Lord's anointed.
Yeah, he described Saul as the Lord's anointed. Okay, what does that actually mean? What does that tell us?
Chosen.
God put him there. I ain't taking him out.
Right, the Lord's anointed means that he's God's choice for the throne. God was the one who installed him. Therefore, only God has the right to take him out. Yes? And David's very aware of that, because it's a foolish thing to do, isn't it? To go against God in something like that. Yeah, to take matters into your own hands. And, we've gone in fairly short space of time, 50 years maybe? We've gone from 40 years, from having no king in Israel. Okay, God is their king, he's their head. And sometimes he leads through we've been through a period of the judges, haven't we? The last of which was Samuel. And now we have a king, which God foresaw in Deuteronomy 17 that the people would eventually want a king. And he's warned them about, how this is going to affect them. They're going to get taxed, and they're going to have to serve the king, give the king in ways that they haven't had to up until now. But they want to be like the nations around them and have a king. But it's God that's going to choose the king for them. Okay, that's made very clear to them. So if now we take God out of the equation, like the Northern Kingdom will in a generation or two's time, and they start choosing their own kings, what happens very quickly with the kings in the northern 10 tribes?
Bad kings.
They're all killing each other off, aren't they? Huh? It looks like the history of Italy. Before it was Italy, it was just the provinces, whoever can put the man on the Pope's throne is going to be over all the other provinces and have power. It's a mess. And that's pretty much what the history of Israel, the Northern Kingdom, will look like until their demise. So the Lord's anointed is very important, and David is very much aware of that. even when some of his own commanders are not. Because look at the response of one of the sons of Zeruiah coming up here. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." So how does Abishai view David, do you think? He's one of his commanders, but his view of the king is very much one of human fealty. He has a hard time seeing, I'm sure he knows that he's the Lord's anointed because he's been told on a number of occasions, but he has a hard time seeing David as the Lord's anointed and not just, some guy that I show fealty and I love him, I have great trust in, I'll do anything for him. And he sees this idiot running along the side of the road, throwing rocks and pebbles and kicking dust at them and swearing at them and all the rest of it, putting curses on them all. And he says, "Let me get that scumbag and just sort him out once and for all." And David turns around, and this is kind of like, I think, when Jesus, having just said something very very nice about Peter, when he asked Peter, who do people say that I am? Matthew 16. What did Peter answer?
You're the Christ.
You're the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus turned around and said, "Well, I didn't tell you that. No one else told you that. God told you that." Yeah. And then the very next passage, it says that Jesus starts telling his disciples that many horrible things are going to happen to me. The Pharisees, the scribes, and the powers that be in Jerusalem are going to treat me terribly and kill me and blah, blah, blah. And what's Peter's response to that? Well, he takes Jesus aside and say, "This shall never be."
He always felt like Jesus needed a press agent.
Right. But more than the press agent, he said, "We're going to defend you with the sword. We're not going to let those so-and-sos do that to you." And what's Jesus' response to Peter? "Get behind me, Satan." Oh, wow. Do you think Peter was ready for that? Get behind me, Satan. For what you have in mind isn't what God has in mind. You're not aligning with God. You're not thinking in the same plane, the spiritual plane that God is thinking. You don't know the big picture. You have no understanding about my purpose of coming to this earth to die as a sacrifice for sin. You don't get it. And so you're speaking more like an adversary. Well, that's exactly what David says here to Zeruiah.
It's interesting. Basically, what does he say? Hey, you don't have a dog in this fight.
Yeah.
Really, what he said, what's this got to do with you?
Yeah. What's
That's
this got to
really
do with you?
interesting.
Yeah.
It just is. It's like, okay, they're his mighty men. They defend him. I could see where they would think, it's my job to make an example of this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let everybody know my master's still a king. We may be running from Jerusalem because we're not prepared to defend it.
Right.
But my master's still a king, and you're going to treat him like the king. I mean,
yeah,
that seems logical to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Which is kind of different from, our first lesson as we talked about Abigail and David's response.
I was thinking that.
That you don't
Yeah,
want
it's
to
gonna
be with
destroy him and all the
destroy you and
household.
your family.
Yeah.
Because you're not honoring me as king. Where at this point it is.
So David, like the rest of us, has days when he's on his game with God and days when he's not.
Right. Well, interesting.
He's on his game today.
Good comments. I'll read from verse 10. But the king said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Look, if my own son is trying to kill me, what are you worrying about this guy for?" You know, leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord's told him to. Does he know that for certain? Well, I don't know, but we do know that David's a prophet. So I'm not going to say yay or nay on that,
Well,
but
I
it's
said,
plausible.
especially given that idea that
This is
people, and you know, they may have been schizophrenic because schizophrenia looks so otherworldly.
yeah, could be.
Well,
David's knows he's feeling a lot of shame, isn't he?
absolutely. David's carrying around some shame and guilt. He may not have the blood of Saul's family, you know, on his hands, but he's got blood on his hands.
He has.
This is why Absalom is so upset against him too.
Right. I mean, that is a fact. And he acknowledges that. He was also told something else, wasn't he? After he was forgiven by God for what he did with Bathsheba and what he did to her husband. Okay. What was he told would be the consequences of that sin? He'd be forgiven, completely forgiven.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen with his family?
Firstborn would die.
Mhm.
They're going to die,
Firstborn
yes.
would die. They're,
Yeah.
His house would be.
But beyond that, his house is going to, they're going to suffer because of it. Absalom, before Absalom, what was his name? The one that had incest with.
yeah, Tamar was
Tamar
the
and-
one. I was thinking about that. And it caused her brother to murder the half-brother that raped her.
Yes.
Right.
So there's all kinds of grief that happens, and this probably is one of the bigger sides of that. So David knows that this is God's doing. God's allowed this to happen because of the consequences of his own sin. Therefore, he kind of like with the census at the end of his life, he throws himself on God's mercy. Maybe he will forgive me. But he knows that the Lord is allowing this to happen. And therefore, there's a purpose to it. You know, David's an old man by this time, but he's still learning, isn't he? He's still learning things that are valuable about his relationship with God. And this is one of those trials, but there's good that will come out of it for him and for those who are with him, maybe. That's a hard lesson for us, I think, in life, to be able to have the wisdom and the maturity to see that when bad things happen, there are still opportunities for us to grow. God's still working on us. We're an unfinished work.
You know, one of the other things you think about, wasn't it the firstborn? Isn't that where the story comes of David fasted in sackcloth and ashes?
Mhm.
And he's sitting there and the servants are whispering, this child did. And he gets up and cleans up and they say, why? Well, I thought maybe God might be merciful,
Mhm.
but it's like a good soldier. But the commander has spoken.
Yeah.
And it's over.
Yeah.
And so I want to get up and wash my face and go about my business and be king and run the country. And
I can't bring him back to me, but maybe one day I'll go with him.
but the idea of accepting, beseeching,
Mhm.
it's okay to beseech.
Yes.
It's okay to have your heart torn out.
Yeah.
But sometimes the answer is not what the one wants.
That's right. That's right. So, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord's told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him, cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust at him. And the king and all his people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. So that's an interesting incident. It doesn't look like anyone went and joined Shimei. He wasn't one who went out and roused up a mob against David. It's just this one guy. Kind of strange occurrence, but valuable in what it can teach us. And then after all this, when what happens, Absalom dies, or is put to death by Joab, and David's returning to Jerusalem. Chapter 19, verse 16. Let's read from there, a few pages on. And Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David.
I'm sorry, so where are you again?
I'm in 2 Samuel 19, starting in verse 16. And with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan before the king, and they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. And he said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come to this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" Well, he's learned something this time. He's called him the Lord's anointed now, but he hasn't changed in his attitude very much, has he? So that's Zeruiah. But David said, "What am I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Like you're a burden to me. You really are. That you should this day be as an adversary to me." There you go. "Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel?" And the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. Well, that's kind of strange, isn't it? The one who was throwing rocks and curses and dust at David and his entourage is the first one to come down and welcome him back. And do you believe his repentance is true, is real?
It kind of reminds me of, high school, when the kids, it's always changing sides, trying to get in with the right crowd.
Right.
And, 1 month they're with this group and one with that group. And
Is he a politician?
yeah, he's a politician.
That's an awfully rational act for a guy that we were saying maybe was crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe he was on his medicine. I'm just not sure they had medicine.
He ate the right flowers that day. But you look at what point did he gather people together to be a part of what his mission or his yelling was going to be about?
Do you think he was gathering those? Well, I hadn't thought about that. Do you think he was gathering those guys? Because it takes a while to gather 1,000 blokes, doesn't it? When you can't just send out a text message to everybody. Was he rallying them, do you think, for another purpose? And then when everything suddenly changed, he said, "Right, we need to go down and welcome the king back for our own, livelihood." Because if he finds out what Benjamin was about to do, and very soon after this, we have the rebellion of Sheba, who's another Benjamite, by the way. So, Benjamin and Judah seem to have kind of, trying relationship as tribes.
But, I was just thinking whether he was gathering those men to finally fight David,
Yeah.
or whether he was gathering those men because David's mercy changed him.
Mm.
That as he was shown mercy, the king had every right to let him be killed,
Right.
and the blood wouldn't have been on his hands. But to show him mercy changes his heart, and that heart goes and gathers other men to say, "We're going to go bow down at the king before he crosses the
You'd like to
river."
think it was out
Yeah.
of crass politics, as in, well, David, Absalom's fixing to do it. I'm going to go out there and rant on David. I hate on David today because what's he going to do? He's going to be dead.
Mm.
It's like, oh, wait a minute.
Now he's really
Oh, David won. Oh no.
Yeah.
Maybe I better go and take care of this.
Yeah. It's interesting. I kind of haven't really thought about that, the 1,000 men of Benjamin enough, but that seems plausible to me. that David just averted something that could have potentially been bad
Right.
from happening.
Politically too, did you really want to, having just left a civil war with your own son, did you really want to start a bunch of stuff with the
Yeah.
tribe of Benjamin?
Yeah, but you know, all these people are seeing an opportunity, aren't they?
Right.
You know, Ahithophel, he saw an opportunity, and then when it didn't look like it was going to go his way, what did he do? He went home, put his affairs in order, and then killed himself. So it's very important to be seen to be standing with the right side at the moment, isn't it? Interesting. So Mephibosheth shows up with this entourage as well, notice, and I think the king asked him, you know, why didn't you come away with me? And he said, well, my servant deceived me, for your servant said, I'll saddle a donkey for me, that I may ride on it and go with the king, because he can't walk. For your servant is lame. And he slandered your servant to my lord the king. And my lord the king is like the angel of God. So do, therefore, whatever seems right. And David offers to split the land with Mephibosheth that he'd given to Ziba. But Mephibosheth said, you know, I just glad you're back and I'll be with you and just let him have that land. So that's kind of interesting. But you know, when David's on his deathbed, we'll just finish with this. 1 Kings chapter 2, he gives Solomon some instructions, and one of them is he's not to allow. He's got to deal with Shimei, and it's going to be up to Solomon how he does that. But he's not to allow him to live, basically. And what Solomon does is verse 36 of 1 Kings 2. The king sent and summoned Shimei and said to him, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there to any place whatsoever." So he's confined to Jerusalem. "From the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall die. Your blood shall be on your own head." Shimei said to the king, "What you say is good, as my lord the king has said, so will your servant do." And so he lived in Jerusalem many days. But then I think it's 3 years later, a couple of his servants fled to the king of Gath. And so Shimei saddles up and goes and gets them back. Well, he's left Jerusalem. He's broken that oath. And Solomon finds out about it and orders that Shimei be put to death. And that's exactly what happened. So lessons from that.
It's interesting politically. Courts. My daughter and I had a long discussion about courtly love, which was unrequited anyway. But courts were a cesspool. But the one thing kings learned pretty quick is you keep the nobles close.
Mm-hmm.
You don't let them live on their estates and get in trouble. So, Versailles was built so that Louis XIV could keep the nobles close. And so knowing that now, this doesn't surprise me at all. This guy is a potential troublemaker. You're going to stay in Jerusalem where we can watch you, and you're not going to leave because you're just up to, you're liable to be up to no good. He was under house arrest in Jerusalem, basically.
Basically, yeah.
And so, now you think, oh, gee, that was kind of harsh, but I don't know. The more I read about court intrigues and
with
politics,
not just that, but with the tribal intrigue between Judah and Benjamin, there's about to be a rebellion that Solomon's going to have to put down as well. But yeah, you're right. That was one of the problems in England with the early kings. The people who were up in the north, in Northumberland, that Duke, you had better give him a lot of power and stuff, because he's going to keep those wild, hairy Scotsmen at bay. That's all there is between, me and us and those guys. So in the far-flung reaches there, patronage was very important.
I always wondered if part of David's charge to Solomon was also political.
Hmm.
These men had been in David's, very close to David for a long time. They were political powers in their own right.
Mm.
I mean, they were David's mighty, and I've always kind of I mean, it's done that way, but it's like, yes, they did wrong.
Well, Joab especially.
Yeah, and so you
He's
really
one of
do
the ones that
wonder,
he says you bring his.
you bring his head down, and
Yeah.
I really kind of wondered if part of that was also David's charging Solomon with things. These are rough men. We killed a lot of people together.
Yeah.
They are rough men. You don't need them in your kingdom.
No, you
They're
don't.
not going to be good for you. He was trying to help Solomon out to stabilize his kingdom.
Yeah.
I don't know,
But
but
he still had intrigue with, was it Adonijah, one of David's sons, you know, so because he'd been given the throne and he wasn't actually the oldest son or firstborn or whatever, you know, there was going to be a fairly potentially difficult transition. So David gives them good advice. Okay.
it's not good to be a royal.
No, it's not. It's not.
It's not. It's a real high risk.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's a 24/7 job. You're in the side of the people the whole time. I'm amazed our Queen's done it for, what is it now, 66 years or something. Quite incredible. Not that she's my Queen anymore because I was an American citizen. You know. Anyway, hey, well, it's good to have you here. Good comments, good discussion.